Clarice Whitmann thought she ruled the block. For 19 years, she had kept a watchful eye over every inch of Popular Drive, every new neighbor, every lawn care mishap. But one Saturday afternoon, a stranger by the pool would change everything. Clarice didn't know it yet, but her instincts were about to lead her down a path she'd never imagined. Stick around, because this is a story about assumptions, shame, and the shocking truth that could happen to anyone. Don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss a story like this again. Clarice Whitmann sat back in her favorite porch chair, the heavy Texas sun pressing down on her as she sipped on her iced lemonade. Her front porch had become her throne, her little kingdom where she reigned over every bit of Popular Drive for nearly 2 decades. She'd watched this neighborhood change, from the neighbors coming and going to the occasional lawn mishap. She knew every face, every car, and every movement. That's how it had always been, and Clarice loved it. It gave her a sense of control. She was the one who kept things in order, the unofficial mayor of the block, the one people could turn to when things went wrong. Today, however, something felt off. She had noticed it the moment she stepped outside, a strange energy in the air, almost like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Clarice adjusted her floral sun hat and reached for the binoculars on the small wicker table beside her. The quiet hum of summer lingered in the background, but her focus narrowed. At the corner house, the new one, there she was. The woman by the pool. Clarice had been watching the house for weeks now. The Hendersons, the elderly couple who had lived there for years, were gone. The house had sold quickly, and Clarice hadn't seen any sign of a moving truck. She hadn't been introduced to the new owners. There were no greetings, no attempts to even wave at the neighbors. Nothing. Just a vague shadow in the windows, like someone was always there but never visible. It didn't sit well with Clarice, who moves into a neighborhood like this without even saying hello. And now, there she was again. The woman, a stranger lounging by the pool wearing a dark green swimsuit, her head wrapped in a tight puff of hair, a paperback book resting casually on her stomach. She didn't seem to have a care in the world. Clarice's eyes narrowed as she squinted through the lenses, her mind racing. No moving truck, no introductions. And now, she has the audacity to sunbathe like she owns the place? The thought burned through her. Clarice's grip tightened around the binoculars and she felt a flicker of something dangerous deep inside her. Something isn't right. Clarice didn't need to be told that. She had the instincts of someone who had lived in the neighborhood long enough to know when things felt wrong. But even as she thought it, a whisper of doubt crept into her mind. What if I'm wrong? What if she's just some lady enjoying her afternoon? But before the doubt could fully settle, she dismissed it. This woman didn't belong here. Clarice was certain of it. Her fingers were already reaching for her phone, dialing the non-emergency police line. The dispatcher answered with a friendly, disinterested tone that set Clarice's blood boiling. She could barely control her words. As she explained, "Hi, yes, I'm calling from Popular Drive. I think someone might be trespassing. There's a woman at the old Henderson place lying by the pool. I don't think she lives there." The silence on the other end felt like an eternity. Clarice's breath quickened, and her heart thudded in her chest as the dispatcher asked for more details. She's black, mid-40s, I think. I don't recognize her. She's just lying there like it's her house. I think she might have jumped the fence or something. You know, could be hiding, could be trespassing. I'm not sure, but it just doesn't feel right. Clarice could practically hear the wheels turning in the dispatcher's head. And then the words came. "We'll send someone out. ETA 8 minutes. Clarice set the phone down and leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving the woman by the pool. Her fingers were tense, gripping the armrests of the chair. She could feel her pulse racing, the anticipation building like a storm inside her. This was it. She was about to be proven right. As the minutes ticked by, her thoughts began to spiral. What if she really is a trespasser? What if something's going on that nobody knows about? What if this woman is up to something dangerous? Clarice's mind raced, every possible scenario playing out in her head. The woman didn't even seem to care. She was still there, relaxed, sipping her drink, flipping through her book. She didn't even seem to notice the tension building in the air. Clarice wanted to shout, to rush over and confront her, but she stayed put. And then finally the sound of sirens broke through the thick silence, and Clarice stood up, her breath caught in her throat. The squad car pulled down the street slowly, methodically. Clarice's heart pounded in her chest as the officers exited the vehicle, their eyes scanning the neighborhood. One officer, tall, tan with a square jaw, approached her. "Are you the one who called?" he asked, his voice steady. Clarice smiled, the tension almost unbearable. "Yes, that's her, right there, by the pool," she said, pointing with an exaggerated calm. The officer nodded, and the other officer made his way to the side gate, slipping inside. Clarice stayed outside, watching intently. This is it, she thought. She'd made the right call. She had to have. She'd protected the neighborhood. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly expect, was that this moment was about to change everything. The next few moments passed in a blur of anticipation and dread. The officers moved carefully, stepping toward the woman who hadn't noticed them yet. Clarice held her breath, the tension in her chest almost unbearable. But then the woman, Danielle, turned, standing up from her lounge chair. She didn't flinch, didn't even seem surprised. She simply stood, a calm authority emanating from her. And when she spoke, her voice was firm and clear. "I live here," she said, her tone unwavering. "This is my house." Clarice's mind went blank. She didn't know how to respond. The officers stood there exchanging an awkward glance. Danielle reached into her bag, pulled out a leather wallet, and showed them her FBI badge. Clarice's heart dropped into her stomach. Everything she had assumed, everything she had believed was wrong. Danielle was the homeowner, and not just any homeowner, but someone powerful, someone important. Clarice stood frozen, her breath coming in shallow gasps, as the realization hit her like a slap to the face. She had just made the biggest mistake of her life, but it wasn't over yet. As Danielle handed over her badge, the world seemed to slow down for Clarice. The glossy metal reflected the sunlight in a way that felt almost too bright, blinding her with the realization that everything she thought she knew was wrong. The weight of her assumptions, her pride and her sense of control came crashing down. She stood there, her mouth dry, frozen in disbelief as Danielle calmly explained that she was, in fact, the owner of the house. Not just a homeowner, but a deputy, director of the FBI. But what hit Clarice hardest wasn't the badge or the quiet authority in Danielle's voice. It was the fact that her neighbors, the very people she had worked so hard to protect, might now see her for what she truly was. A busybody, a woman too quick to judge and too slow to understand. Clarice's gaze flickered to the two officers, standing nearby. They hadn't said much since their arrival, but now their silence spoke volumes. Officer Ortega, the tall, square-jawed officer who had initially approached her, wasn't looking at her anymore. His eyes had drifted to Danielle with an almost apologetic look, and then back to Clarice. He had been part of the uncomfortable reality check for Clarice, the one who had to face the consequences of her actions. He knows, Clarice thought bitterly. He knows I made a mistake, and he's not going to let me forget it. But it wasn't just the officers that Clarice needed to worry about. Her mind raced back to the gossip that had already started circulating throughout the block. She had already felt the heat of her neighbors' eyes on her, their judgment hanging thick in the air. What if they had heard the sirens? What if they saw her standing there, reporting a woman who was a federal agent no less? As if on cue, Clarice's phone buzzed in her pocket. The familiar ringtone of a group chat notification made her stomach twist. She hesitated for a moment, but then her curiosity got the better of her. She unlocked the phone, scrolling through the messages, her breath catching as she read Carol's text. "Clarice, I heard the cops were on your street. Everything okay?" Carol, her old friend, the woman she'd spent countless afternoons gossiping with over the phone, talking about everything from the state of the lawn to the suspicious neighbors down the block. Clarice could feel the weight of her gaze even through a text. Carol was always in the loop, always there to lend an ear or give her opinion. Clarice could already imagine the judgment in her friend's voice. Her fingers hovered over the screen, but the words didn't come. How do I explain this? How do I tell her that I called the cops on an FBI agent? The officers finally gave a nod to Danielle, a silent acknowledgement of the situation. They both turned and began walking back toward their cars, leaving Clarice standing there with nothing but her shame. Danielle, however, didn't seem to be bothered by it. She simply returned to her lounge chair by the pool, picking up her book like nothing had happened. Clarice's heart pounded as she watched the officers walk past her, not even glancing her way. It felt like they were silently condemning her. Clarice looked down at the ground, her mind swirling in a haze of guilt and confusion. What did I do wrong? Why did I think she didn't belong here? As the officers left, Clarice felt the sting of her mistake cutting deeper. She had thought she was doing the right thing, trying to keep her neighborhood safe. But she had been too quick to judge, and in doing so, she had made an enemy of someone who could have been her neighbor, someone who could have taught her a lesson she never expected to learn. The silence was deafening. Clarice turned back toward her house, but she couldn't help glancing at the other neighbors' homes. Was anyone watching? Did anyone hear the sirens, see the officers, know what had happened? She could already feel the eyes of the neighborhood on her, the whispers and stares that would follow. She had lost her reputation, and now she had to deal with the consequences. Just as she walked up to her porch, there was a knock at the door. Clarice froze. Her first instinct was to ignore it, to retreat back into the comfort of her home and pretend like nothing had happened, but she knew that wasn't possible. It's her, she thought. Danielle. She's come to confront me. When Clarice opened the door, she was taken aback. It wasn't Danielle standing there. It was Officer Ortega. His presence alone made Clarice's stomach drop. She tried to mask the anxiety bubbling inside her, but she couldn't hide the way her voice cracked when she greeted him. "Afternoon, Ms. Whitman," he said, his voice flat but not unkind. "I just wanted to follow up on yesterday's call and clarify something." Clarice stood frozen, her mind racing. What now? Officer Ortega stepped inside as she opened the door wider, but he didn't seem like he was there to scold her. Instead, he seemed concerned. He folded his arms as he began speaking, his tone firm but not hostile. "You should know," he began, "that every time someone files a report like that, especially when there's no real threat, it gets recorded. And if it happens again, it could be flagged." Clarice's heart skipped a beat. Flagged, what does that mean?" she stammered. Ortega gave her a slow, almost sympathetic look. "It means that if this becomes a pattern, you might be investigated for harassment or discrimination depending on the context." Clarice's breath hitched in her throat. The weight of his words sank in like a heavy stone. Her worst fear had just come true. Not only had she ruined her own reputation, but now she could be facing official scrutiny for making a baseless call. Her pride, her sense of control had led her to this moment, this painful, humbling moment. As Ortega turned and left, Clarice stood there, her mind reeling. She had been so sure, so confident in her actions. But now she saw how easily assumptions could spiral out of control, and how quickly one moment of judgment could undo everything she thought she stood for. Clarice stood motionless in the middle of her living room, the door closing quietly behind Officer Ortega. His words echoed in her ears like a relentless drumbeat, each syllable pounding deeper into her chest. Flagged for harassment or discrimination. The weight of those words sank in, and with it came the suffocating realization of just how much she had overstepped. This wasn't just about making a mistake. It was about how deep that mistake could go and the ripple effects it would have on her life. She hadn't been prepared for this. Clarice had always prided herself on knowing everything, being the one who kept order in her quiet little neighborhood. She knew who belonged and who didn't. But now, it seemed, The universe had handed her an irreversible lesson. Her breath came in shallow bursts. She walked slowly to the window and peered outside, her eyes scanning the street as if she were trying to find the answers in the mundane details of her everyday surroundings. Across the street, Danielle was still lounging by the pool, a picture of calm confidence. It was maddening. How can she be so calm? Clarice thought, frustration simmering beneath her skin. The woman she'd wrongly accused of trespassing, of breaking the unwritten rules of the neighborhood, was now living here freely, unbothered, in complete control. The audacity of it all felt like a slap in the face, but it wasn't just about Danielle. Clarice knew the real issue now wasn't just the confrontation with her neighbor. It was what it represented. For the first time in a long while, Clarice felt completely out of control. The carefully curated image of the perfect, watchful neighbor was crumbling before her eyes. Her reputation was at risk, and worse, her place in the neighborhood's social fabric was threatened. What will people think of me? She wondered. How can I ever show my face again? The phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a group chat notification, it was a text from Carol. Did you hear? Words getting around about what happened with the police. Are you okay? Clarice could feel the heat creeping up her neck. Her fingers hovered over the screen, a whirlwind of emotions flooding her. Am I okay? She thought bitterly. How could I be okay? She didn't know what to say to Carol, or anyone for that matter. She was humiliated, embarrassed to the point where every fiber of her being screamed to hide. But she couldn't hide forever. She had to face the consequences. Her mind spiraled back to her conversation with Officer Ortega. If it becomes a pattern, the words replayed in her mind. What if I'm not just the annoying neighbor anymore? What if they see me as a liability? As someone who causes trouble? What if people start avoiding me? The thought of being ostracized was unbearable. Clarice had always been the one people relied on, the one who knew everything that was happening in the neighborhood. But now she wasn't sure she even knew who she was anymore. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door again. Clarice jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. She was sure it was Danielle. She didn't know what to expect, but she wasn't ready for this. She opened the door slowly, her palms sweaty, and there stood Carol, her neighbor, her friend, standing in front of her with a stern look on her face. You called the cops on her, didn't you? Carol asked, her voice soft but heavy with accusation. Clarice's stomach twisted. She nodded, feeling the weight of her actions finally hitting her full force. I thought she didn't belong here, she whispered, the words feeling strange, foreign, as if they weren't even her own. Carol stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her eyes scanning the room. Clarice, she said, her voice now more concerned than accusatory. This isn't like you. You've never been this quick to judge. I know, Clarice said, her voice breaking. But something didn't feel right. I couldn't shake the feeling, and She trailed off, not knowing how to explain herself. How could she justify a mistake this big? Carol sat down on the couch, her expression softening. What are you going to do now? This isn't just about you anymore. The whole neighborhood's going to hear about this. People are already talking. Clarice felt her pulse quicken. I can't believe this is happening. I've ruined everything, Carol. Everything I've worked for, everything I've built in this neighborhood. It's all falling apart. She buried her face in her hands, the weight of her shame almost too much to bear. For a long moment, Carol didn't say anything. Then, quietly, she spoke. You're going to have to fix it. You have to own up to what you did. You can't just hide behind excuses. You have to go talk to her. Clarice looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. Talk to Danielle? The idea was almost unthinkable. How could I face her, after what I did? Yes, Carol said, her voice firm. You've already made things worse, but the only way to make it right is to go to her, apologize, and show her that you're willing to change. Clarice's heart skipped a beat. Change. She'd never thought about it that way. She had always believed she was in the right, always believed that her way of thinking was the best. But now, as she sat here, in the quiet of her living room. It became clear to her just how much she had failed, not just Danielle, but herself. Taking a deep breath, Clarice nodded. "You're right. I have to make it right." Danielle's house was quiet as Clarice walked across the street, her steps slow and heavy. She felt like a criminal walking to the gallows. Her hands trembled as she knocked on the door, the sound of it echoing in her chest. After what seemed like an eternity, Danielle opened the door. Her face was calm, unreadable, as if she had expected this moment. Clarice's stomach twisted again. I'm sorry," Clarice said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I was wrong. I made a terrible mistake." Danielle didn't speak at first. She simply looked at Clarice, her expression unreadable. Clarice could feel the weight of her gaze, but she didn't look away. She had to face this. She had to face her. "I know you didn't mean to cause trouble," Danielle said finally, her voice even, "but you did. And it's going to take time to rebuild that trust. Not just with me, but with everyone here." Clarice nodded, her throat tight. "I know, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this." Danielle stepped aside and let her in, and for the first time, Clarice felt the full force of her own vulnerability. She had walked into this moment thinking she could fix things with a simple apology, but now she knew it would take more than just words. It would take change, real change. The story of Clarice Whitmann was just beginning to unfold, and it wasn't going to be easy. But in that moment, as she stood in front of Danielle, Clarice knew this was her chance to finally see the world from someone else's perspective, and to begin the long process of healing. As Clarice sat across from Danielle, the weight of the situation slowly began to lift from her shoulders. The initial awkwardness had worn off, and now there was a sense of calm that filled the room. Clarice could feel it, the shift, the change. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't holding on to the need to be right, the need to control. She had let go of her pride, and in doing so, she had made space for something she had never truly allowed herself to experience. "Understanding," Danielle spoke again, her voice steady yet kind. "I'm not angry, Clarice, I get it. You acted out of what you thought was best for the neighborhood. But the way you saw me, you saw a threat, something different. What I really want is for people to take the time to see me, to know me, not just assume." Clarice nodded, her eyes welling with tears. She hadn't realized how much she had allowed her biases, her preconceived notions to guide her actions. She hadn't seen Danielle. She hadn't taken the time to even try to understand. Instead, she had let the comfort of her routine, her role as the neighborhood watchful eye, blind her to the reality of who Danielle was, and who she herself had become. "I'm sorry," Clarice said again, this time with more sincerity than she thought possible. "I should have come to you. I should have spoken to you first, gotten to know you before I jumped to conclusions." Danielle smiled, but it wasn't the smile Clarice had expected. It wasn't cold or distant. It was soft, understanding. "It's okay. Honestly, it was hard for me too. I moved here looking for peace, for a fresh start. But what I found instead was judgment. People think they know me, but they don't. And now, you're the first person who's really tried to understand." The words settled in the air between them, and Clarice felt a knot loosen in her chest. This was more than just an apology. It was an invitation to be better, to be more than just the sum of her assumptions. "I don't want to be the kind of person who judges first and asks questions later," Clarice admitted, her voice quiet but firm. "I've been that person for too long, but I don't want to be her anymore." Danielle leaned back in her chair, folding her arms but still smiling. "Then don't be. It's not easy, but it's the only way to change. And change, like trust, takes time. It's a journey, not a one-time fix." Clarice thought about that for a long moment. A journey. It wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. It wasn't something that could be undone with a simple apology. But it was a beginning, and that was enough for her. "I want to learn," Clarice said, her voice clear now, free from the hesitation that had plagued her for days. I want To learn from you, from the people I've judged, from everyone I've pushed away because they didn't fit into my narrow view of what's right." Danielle nodded, her eyes warm. "I'm happy to help. It's going to take time. But you've already taken the hardest step." Clarice stood up, her legs a little shaky but her heart lighter than it had been in days. She walked toward the door, her mind racing with everything she had just learned. She felt different, more grounded, more present in the world around her. But it wasn't just her own growth that had struck her. It was the realization that this conversation was part of a larger story. A story of change, of growth, of community. The kind of community that wasn't built on assumptions and judgment, but on listening, on understanding, and on offering grace. "Thank you," Clarice said softly, turning back to face Danielle, "for giving me this chance to see the world differently." Danielle stood as well, and for the first time the two women shared a real, genuine smile. A smile that bridged the gap between them and the walls Clarice had built for so long. "You're welcome. And you're not alone on this journey, Clarice. I'll be here." With that, Clarice stepped out of the house, her feet feeling heavier with every step, but her heart soaring. The neighborhood wasn't going to be the same anymore. She wasn't going to be the same anymore. As Clarice walked back to her house, she thought about how much she had learned in such a short time. The day she had feared most had become the day she finally started to understand. She thought about the neighbors she had once felt so superior to, the people she had judged without truly knowing them. She thought about her own need to control, to impose her standards on everyone around her, and how that need had made her blind to the richness and complexity of the lives of others. It wasn't just about Danielle anymore. It was about Clarice, about the person she was becoming. Someone who listened, someone who learned. For the first time, she realized that the greatest way to keep a neighborhood safe wasn't by keeping everyone in line, but by allowing them to be seen, to be heard, and to be understood. As she stepped inside her home, Clarice felt the shift deep within her. The change had started, and it wasn't just about being right or wrong. It was about growing. It was about not staying stuck in the past, clinging to old habits, old judgments. It was about stepping forward into the unknown with openness, with humility, and with a willingness to change. And that, she realized, was the true meaning of community. In the weeks that followed, Clarice's relationship with Danielle grew stronger. They talked more often, not just about their differences, but about their lives, their experiences, and the struggles they had each faced. Clarice slowly rebuilt the trust she had lost, not just with Danielle, but with herself. And the neighborhood, too, began to change. The walls that had once kept everyone apart slowly began to crumble, as neighbors saw one another not as strangers, but as fellow human beings, deserving of respect and understanding. Clarice learned the hard way that judgment was easy, but true connection, the kind that created lasting bonds, took effort. It took humility. It took time. And in the end, she realized that sometimes the greatest gift we can give one another is the chance to see each other, truly see each other.